But let's get straight to our next topic and talking about, well, the police, two-tier policing, which does not exist, but, extraordinary recruitment that basically penalises white candidates, which we know absolutely for a fact now, they're admitting it openly now, saying the quiet bit out loud, does exist. Let's talk about all of this now with former police officer and founder of Fair Cop, Harry Miller. Very good morning to you, Harry.
Good morning,
Thank you for joining us.
Very depressing reading is the Southport 24 report.
I have to say, well, let's give us a moment to ask you a question, my lovely. Let's talk about that first, because the report's by a Home Affairs Select Committee. It's 11 members, 7 of them are Labour, 2 of them are Lib Dem, 2 of them are Tory, one of them certainly, I mean, could put a yellow rosette on her any day of the week, you wouldn't notice. But they said there was no evidence of two-tier policing in the handling of the Southport riots. And they said they also talked about how prosecutors let fake news spread by blocking the release of some facts which wouldn't in any way prejudice the trial of Axel Rudikabana, the Southport killer, and that led to part of the problem. But when they say there's no evidence of two-tier policing, what did you make of that?
It's complete and utter nonsense. I mean, they not only said that, they said that the suggestion is disgraceful and unsubstantiated. Well, it's not disgraceful. We can see it with our own eyes. Let's ask Lucy Connolly, for instance, if there is two-tier policing. What did she do? She put out a fairly injudicious, angry...
No, it was a really nasty, horrible tweet. Let's be honest about what it was.
Yeah, it was, but she took it down 4 hours later. Yeah. Now, that's the kind of thing that would have been said in pubs across the country, right the way through Britain and abroad. And the response to the atrocity in Southport is to get absolutely furious, because those children are, in fact, our children, the children of us all. And we saw this, and the natural response is to get angry, and sometimes anger goes over the top. But what Lucy Connolly did, she simply spoke, then went for a walk, thought about it, and took back her words. Yeah. As I say, this happens all over the place. The police went after her, and she's been fast-tracked through the criminal justice system and thrown in jail for over 2 years, when some of the actual rioters got less. Yeah. This is two-tier policing. The police cracked down on people who suggested, in a vacuum of information, that the murderer was probably something to do with immigration and probably something to do with Islam. We were told that we were stirring up hatred by mentioning that, and it turns out, after all, we were correct. Now,
he had an Al-Qaeda manual and was later charged with a terror offence. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's an awful lot of talk about criminalising misinformation. But what about withholding information? The police had good information, which they simply withheld. And there's nothing like fear to spark violence, and nothing sparks fear like the dark.
And also, again, it was all this, people got to remember this, was also the context of the two-tier policing we've seen in recent years. And again, getting to the justice system, which we've definitely seen clearly. I mean, they're open about it now. They're literally talking openly about giving people different sentences and different, mitigating factors based on the colour of their skin and religion and the like. But we saw just a few weeks before Southport, we saw the Hare Hills riot, where the police just basically, they just ran away for hours on end, leaving people to ransack their local streets and burn buses and goodness knows what. And because it wasn't, should we say, white indigenous population, that apparently wasn't such an issue. We saw in 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, we were told, largely peaceful. Well, not the footage I saw was it remotely largely peaceful, and the policing of that compared with, say, the policing of anti-lockdown protests, which I went on, which were largely peaceful, very, very peaceful indeed, and yet police went in with batons. We see the policing, if anyone's got an England flag anywhere near their march, even they're there to protect statues and the like from Black Lives Matter and others, we saw the police going in very heavy-handed. It is not possible to have eyes and ears in this country and not see the difference in the policing style. Is there, as a former copper yourself, is there any reason why that would be the case, but nothing to do with, community cohesion concerns and woke concerns, but actually that you do police different groups of people differently?
Yeah, of course you police different groups of people differently. You do a risk assessment, and if you've got a high risk group that tends towards violence, you police them differently. Say from a bunch of
young white men,
WI women. Out on a protest. Of course you make risk assessments. The problem here is, if you tell me that there is a demonstration next week if you tell me who is demonstrating, I will be able to tell you how the police are going to police it. And it won't be to do with risk. It will be to do with ideology. As you rightly point out, if England flags are being flown, it will be one sort of policing. If it's Palestinian flags being flown, it will be another sort of policing. In fact, I was at a march in Pride in, I think it was August, September of last year, where the chief constable was actually marching behind a bunch of protesters shouting from the river to the sea and waving their Palestinian flags. Now, can you imagine that happening behind a bunch of people waving Union Jacks? It wouldn't happen. It simply wouldn't happen. So this idea that there is two-tier policing, the police don't admit it because they dare not look the truth squarely in.
And that's that is the really big concern, isn't it? And again, I think you're a police officer. You've been at the sharp end of this, and I know my audience listening and watching right now will completely accept. You're throwing bricks at the police. You're threatening the police. You're going to get arrested, and they should go in heavy-handed. I've got no issue there. You're threatening people in an asylum hotel or anything like that. Absolutely, I want you arrested. I want you off the streets, and I want you behind bars. I've got no issue with that, and most people don't. But there were ordinary, peaceful people who were genuinely angry, genuinely concerned. They were demonstrating in Southport and other places, and they kind of got somehow, there's lots of reports that maybe sort of kettled up and caught up with the people who were protesting it and got treated the same. But we also saw footage, again, on mainstream media of a large group of men. They were protesting as a community, as Muslim men. They were worried about their communities, understandable, given the context at the time, armed with baseball bats and goodness knows what other weapons, on a roundabout. Literally, police didn't go in, police didn't do anything. If that had been a bunch of white men or anyone of any other religion, the police would have gone in. And that's as simple as that, isn't it?
Absolutely. Can you imagine a police officer standing in front of a crowd of white Union Jack England flag waving people and saying, guys, if you don't mind, just put your weapons back in Weatherspoons and collect them later.
Which is virtually what they said. Could they take their weapons back to the mosque?
That's precisely what happened. So this is two-tier policing. And the police treat us like idiots. They think that we can't see. Well, we can see, and we don't like it. And it should not come as a surprise when the mob gets angry. Now, this report, the Southport 24 report, it seems much more concerned with how to police an angry mob than it is with tackling why they're angry in the first place. If the police were a little bit more honest, if the police took seriously grooming gangs, if the police didn't criminalise people who expressed concern about immigration, if the police stopped picking sides and waving flags and marching with left-wing nutters, then the accusation of two-tier policing might indeed be unsubstantiated.
Yeah, indeed.
We can't substantiate it.
Well, also, when a lot of it's actually in black and white, quite literally on paper, we've had the reports about West Yorkshire Police. Basically, you get 48 hours notice to apply to join the police if you're white. If you're from a religious or a minority ethnic group, you can apply any day of the year. You're given help and support, basically told how to do well in the interview. But absolutely, there's no discrimination, not doing anything illegal. Of course not, they insist, when it's blatantly obvious to everyone that is absolutely, I mean, it should be certainly against the law. But even we've seen an extraordinary situation. This is exclusive in our story, in our station today, about police forces basically having a diversity drive, encouraging people with no GCSEs, even barely speaking English, to apply to join the police. And a whistleblower pointing out they're basically asked to go out to areas largely, ethnic minority populated areas, get people, talk to them about joining the police, get them to sign up. It doesn't matter if they'll ever get through or not, if they're up to scratch, but as long as you've got a tick in the box saying they've said they expressed interest, then you're doing something worthwhile. But by the way, they don't have time to go to attend a burglary.
Yeah, that's right. The police are far more interested in chasing down diversity targets than they are in chasing and catching criminals. And this is a national scandal. I mean, you look at recent stories where the police go in heavy-handed against somebody's, last week it was heavy-handed against a mother who'd confiscated a laptop.
Yeah.
This wouldn't happen.
No, the iPads of our own kids.
Exactly, the iPads of our own kids. Exactly. This cannot possibly happen if you have a legally literate police force. Let's not beat around the bush. Law is meant to be a little bit difficult. Law is meant to be slightly complicated. You can't be a thickie and deal in law, and you cannot be a thickie and be a police officer and expect to apply the law. And unfortunately, we have lost we've got an entire generation of police officers who do not seem to understand the law. And I don't blame them. I blame the College of Policing.
Yeah.
I blame.
Well, they're too busy doing DEI training and putting their rainbow face paint on rather than learning about the law. I always find it extraordinary how often I see these cases, and I think that is a police officer who knows less about the law than me because I did my journalism training. I find that, frankly, terrifying. Harry Miller, absolutely fantastic always to have you on the show. Former police officer, founder of Fair Cop. Thank you so much for joining us.